begin our exciting agenda by welcoming our first presenter, John Englander, with his presentation, Rebuilding Higher for Storms, Tides, and Sea Level Rise.
Some keynotes that start in the morning are kind of, should we say, bland and easy to assimilate and start the day on an easy note. This one's not going to be that for you. I need to let you know up front, it's probably going to be disturbing. But those of you that work in public health and epidemiology, you face lots of disturbing visions of the future. And your whole mission is to be prepared and to be there for when disaster strikes. What I'm going to describe to you is a bit of a different disaster, but it combines in different ways. And I think you'll see the connection, and certainly I'll have time for questions at the end. How we prepare for future storms, flooding from extreme tides, which is driven by sea level rise, is going to shape our future in a surprising way. And while it's great to see Puerto Rico not only rebuilding, but coming on strong, and as emblematic of the region, the surrounding islands, this is the time to start thinking differently about the future, because the future is not going to be like the past. So I hope you take away from this, besides a disturbing picture of the future, which as you'll see applies everywhere in the world in the coastal environment, that it's an opportunity to do different long-term planning and preparation, so that when disasters strike, we have an idea, which is, of course, the purpose of your whole conference. So, rebuilding higher for storms, tides, and sea level rise. And I'll show you how they combine. And I want to look at it from three different perspectives. One is, of course, nature. What is nature going to throw at us? But then for you to think about the culture, not only of Puerto Rico and the surrounding diverse islands of the Caribbean, but the character of the people you deal with, both as a positive and also as a challenge, perhaps in terms of culture and education levels and things like that, so that they are prepared. But that this really gets into things like architecture and how do we preserve our history. But let's look at what's happening in the world. This is a depiction from NASA showing last year temperature average compared to the prior century. Now you probably can't see the detail, but the red is 2 degrees Celsius, or that's 3.6 Fahrenheit. Just for simple calculation, where I do sometimes Celsius, sometimes Fahrenheit, excuse me, but blue would be cooler. There's only 2 places in the world that are cooler last year than they were over the last century, and that's where the ice is melting in Greenland and Antarctica. I'm going to take you there in a few minutes, visually. But that's a stunning picture. And what I want to explain to you, for those of you that don't look at climate very often, is how that connects with weather and storms, tides, and sea level rise. If the ocean is warmer, we've got more heat in the system, and we're going to have strange and probably more severe storms. And they're going to break out of historic patterns because we've warmed the oceans already 1 degree Celsius. So if the oceans are warmer, the storm patterns will be different. They'll evaporate more, because when you warm water, it evaporates. If there's more moisture in the air, it has to come down as rain or snow, depending upon the local temperature. Right? And even though the world's warming, there's still a lot of air masses that are cold enough to have snow. So a warming ocean means 3 things: more rain, more snowfall at times, and more drought, which seems contradictory or counterintuitive, but it's perfectly what we would expect in a warming world. And you, of course, here in Puerto Rico have a terrible drought at the moment. So the point is, as context for your epidemiology and your public health and your planning for the next disaster relief, we need to realize the world is changing. Now, most people think that melting icebergs relate to sea level. How many of you would associate melting icebergs with sea level rise? Yes, I would think about half of you. That's normal. They don't. They're like ice cubes in a glass, and you can run this experiment at home. You can take a glass, put some ice cubes in it, of course. And when we put the ice in it, like a new ice cube, the water level rises. But the ice is 10% above the surface, just like an iceberg, because ice is almost 10% less dense than water. It's a surprising property of water. And so again, you can really look at this. I'm going to be talking about rising sea level. The one issue that is a special impact is it's going to change the shoreline. The reason sea level is rising, just going to give you about 5 or 10 minutes on sea level, and then get to the more general topic of how do we build, why should we build higher for storms, tides, and sea level rise, is it's the glaciers on land. As the glaciers on land break off into new icebergs when they hit the water, that's like adding an ice cube to the glass. So that does raise the water level. And as the glaciers on land melt and the water runs to the ocean, that's like pouring more water in the glass. And of course, the level will rise. So those are the two primary reasons that sea level rises. And I'll show you it's because of the massive glaciers and ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland. There's a third reason, which is more subtle, which is that as you warm liquid, it expands slightly. Thermal expansion of water. And so as the oceans warm, there's a very slight height increase just from the warming, the molecular expansion, if you will. In fact, slides at johnenglander.net will get you a set of some of my graphics, if you want to write that down. Slides at johnenglander.net. And for those that do Twitter, by the way, I should have said this up front, I'm at John Englander, very easy. So Greenland and Antarctica hold 212 feet of sea level rise. We do not want to let them melt. We do not want to cause them all to melt. We want to slow the melting as soon as possible. But some melting is already in the pipeline. It's unavoidable. And that's really what the context I want to give you. Greenland, I've led about a half dozen trips to Greenland. I'm leading another expedition there in September for those who want to go and see what's happening firsthand. It's an amazing experience. It will blow your minds. Of course, probably imagining that much ice is very difficult in a tropical environment like Puerto Rico. But Greenland is about the size of the eastern United States. In fact, it's beginning exponential growth, which is a big problem. If we look back at the change in sea level since the last ice age, again, this is all on the slides you can get from slides at johnenglander.net, because I know it's hard to take phone pictures. But since the last ice age, 22,000 years ago, not long ago in geologic history, a huge distance back in human history, of course, but it rose 390 feet, 120 meters. And it got to the present level about 6,000 years ago, which is for all purposes recorded human history. So the fact that we thought sea level was sea level is because for all of recorded human history, about 5,000 or 6,000 years, this has been pretty much where it is. Not only is it surprising that it rose almost 400 feet, but it wasn't a smooth rise. In fact, there were 3 bumps there, you can see by the red arrows. And if we were at one of those points in history and looked backwards and said, well, what's happened in the last 100 years because we want to plan for the future, we'd be fooled. We need to plan for the first, my best simple guidance is we need to plan for the first 3 feet of sea level rise as soon as possible. Guidance can't get any simpler than that. I can't tell you when we'll have 3 feet of sea level rise. I do believe we'll have more than that this century. That will be an extraordinary challenge. The good news is it can't happen next week or next month or next year. Not possible. There's no way to melt that much ice that quickly. So there is a good side to that story. There is time to prepare for this change. And this is a global change. So while people wonder how many inches by what year, I can't tell you that. I can tell you I can't imagine getting more than a foot of sea level rise in the next decade or 2 or 3. But by mid-century, 30 years from now, we could have a foot or 2 of sea level rise. But it will amplify beyond that. By later in the century, it could be a couple of times that. So if you have 80 years to begin to plan and adapt, the truth is we can. But we have to educate ourselves and our friends, family, co-workers, elected officials, because they don't understand what you now know. So that's why I hope you take the slide set that I'm going to tell you how to download and teach this to others, because most people are confused. They think that if we just switch to renewable energy and drive electric cars and have solar panels, that climate change will go away and sea level rise will stop. But they know now that they need to plan for more. And they are planning for 10 feet of sea level rise this century. That's not well known. 3 meters. Because they want to be safe. And again, when you look at 80 years, the truth is, once we get our minds around it, just like infectious disease or the Zika virus or something else, we can come up with amazing technologies. But first we've got to start with the facts, which is what you're all about in your fields. There are ways we can design cities. This is an example in the Netherlands of a city called Vlissingen, or Flushing, down near the Belgian border. And if you look at it carefully, they've got about 30 feet of distance between the water on the right, just like in the Florida Keys and places like that, and I'm sure parts of Puerto Rico. So we can design for things once we can characterize them and understand them. This is a town in part of Hamburg, Hafen City, same town. So designing for sea level rise and flooding doesn't have to be a giant wall. Another group that does this kind of work, planning out 30 years, is Ecology and Environment. They're helping to do master plans, looking out 30 years in the future. By the way, I think that's the right time frame. If we look out 30 years, that's a generation. It may be a home mortgage. But the end of the century that most people talk about with climate change is a little too far in the future, 81 years from now. And an email to 30 years at ENE, that's like Echo, November Echo, ENE.com, is a firm that works on this, that I also advise. There will be floating cities in some places. I'm sure you've seen futuristic drawings like this. Now, that's not going to satisfy the 4 million people in Miami that are in low areas stuck out there in the Atlantic any more than solve everything in San Juan, millions of people. In fact, in recent surveys, even at the last election, people started saying climate's more important, but you know what? Out of 19 issues, it comes up 18. Because there's always something bigger. It can be health, it can be Social Security or Medicare or abortion rights or immigration and whatever. And all those things are hot issues. And people then say, oh yeah, and also climate change. I respectfully suggest you got to turn that around. Climate's whether the environment is livable for human beings. I've never used a complicated word. I don't even use the word mitigate, which people love to talk about. I talk about slow the warming and reducing the flood hazard. Use plain language. So I hope that with a simple image, back to where I started, that rising seas, which will happen with exponential growth, will slowly but surely at an accelerating rate, or hopefully an inspiring one, in the face of a daunting reality. We don't have a choice. We can't argue with the ocean. The ocean and the glaciers and the ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland don't care about our problems and our budgets and our politics. In fact, they're going to do what they're going to do, just like Maria did. We can protest and plead and cry, and there's tragedy, and it's terrible that thousands of people died. But just as you all here are looking at the various things to learn from that so that the next time is better, hopefully this adds to that and doesn't denigrate or take away from it or in any way refute it. This is another layer. Thank you.